medieval period. The Middle Ages or medieval times in Europe was a long period of history from 580 to 1500s. That's 1,000 years. It covers the time from the fall of the Roman Empire to the rise of the Ottoman Empire. It was also called as Anglo-Saxon period or the Dark Ages. The Middle Ages are called this because it is the time between the fall of the Imperial Rome and the beginning of the early modern Europe. The Dark Ages are given this name because Europe was in disarray in comparison to the orderliness of classical antiquity, and life was short and poor. Life was also harsh in this period. With a limited diet and little comfort, women were subordinate to men in both peasant and noble classes, and were expected to ensure the smooth running of household. Children had a 50% of survival rate beyond the age of 1 and began to contribute to the family life around the age of 12. The Canterbury Tales. Canterbury Tales was written by Geoffrey Chaucer between 1387 and his death in 1400s. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of 24 stories within a frame story. The frame story involves the pilgrimage of 30 people traveling from London to Canterbury Cathedral to visit the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. Each character is supposed to tell 2 stories on the way to Canterbury and 2 more stories on the way back to London. The price of telling the best story is a free upon their return. Since the collection contains only 24 stories, some historians believe Chaucer's work will remain unfinished upon his death, while others believe that he never intended the collection to include 120 stories. The Canterbury Tales is also important because of Chaucer's decision to write in English, especially in Middle English. In the late 14th century, French was still the primary literary language of those in power. The Canterbury Tales become one of the first major work of literature to be written in English. When Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, the printing press had not yet been invented. That means that it had to be passed down via manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts rather. Although no manuscripts in Chaucer's own hand remain, over 80 copies that date back from the 16th century have been found, suggesting that the Canterbury Tales was extremely popular in the century after Chaucer's death. Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer was an English poet and author, widely considered as the greatest English poet of the Middle Ages. He is best known for the Canterbury Tales. He had been called as the father of English literature, or alternatively, the father of English poetry. Beowulf. Beowulf is an old English story by an anonymous Anglo-Saxon poet. This poem tells a story of a strong and brave warrior, Beowulf, who defeats monsters and goes on to become a king. Beowulf's first major battle was against Grendel, a monster that had been terrorizing the Slidings. This literary piece gives a historical importance. Being the old surviving English poem from the Anglo-Saxon period, Beowulf gives the reader insight into the history of England and what eventually happens to become British literature.
The Dark Ages and the Bards. English medieval literature had, so far as we know, no existence until the Christian times of the Dark Ages, when Latin was the language for English literature. It was passed by word of mouth from one generation to another by English, Welsh, and Irish bards. Thomas Aquinas was also known by the nickname Dr. Angelicus, Dr. Universalis, and Angelic Doctor. He was born in 1227 at the castle of Roccasecca, near Aquino, Italy. He was a student of Albertus Magnus, and he was one of the greatest theologians of Catholic Church. He died on March 1274, and he was pronounced a saint by Pope John XXII on July 18, 1323.
The Dream of the Holy Rood, an old English lyric, the earliest dream poem, and one of the finest religious poems in the English language. But it is not longer attributed to the kind man or the kind woman. In a dream, the unknown poet beholds a beautiful tree, the rood or the cross in which Christ died. The rood tells him its own story, forced to be the instrument of the Savior's death. It describes how it suffered the nail wounds, spear shafts, and insults along with the Christ to fulfill God's will. Once blood-stained and horrible, it is now the repentant sign of mankind's redemption. The poem was originally known only fragmentary form from some 8th century runic inscriptions on the Roodwell's cross, now standing at the parish church of Ruthwell, now Dumfries District, Dumfries and Galloway Region, Scotland. The complete version became known with the discovery of the 10th century Vercelli book in northern Italy in 1850. Martin Luther, born in 1483, died in 1546. A German professor of theology, priest, author, composer, former Augustinian monk, and is best known as a seminal figure in Protestant Reformation. And as the namesake of Lutheranism, Luther was ordained to the priesthood in 1507. And through his words and action, Luther precipitated a movement that reformulated certain basic tenets of Christian beliefs and resulted in the division of Western Christendom between Roman Catholicism and the new Protestant traditions, mainly Lutheranism, Calvinism, and the Anglican Communion, the Anabaptists, and the Anti-Trinitarians. He is one of the most influential figures in the history of Christianity.
In this period, we have three significant literary genres. First one is elegy. Elegy, upon serious reflection, typically a lament for the dead. It is also a sad poem that expresses sorrow for someone who is dead. Ito yung mga parang tula na inaalay nila sa mga taong mahal nila sa buhay na namatay na. Example ng elegy is elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray. Let's move on to the second one, is the religious liturgy. It is the ritual or script for various forms of public worship in churches. It also refers to the structured worship that happens when Christians meet together at church. Ito yung mga ritual o yung parang pag nag-church sila, ito yung talagang gagawin nila. Hindi ito mawawala sa loob ng gagawin nila yung sa church na yun. Halimbawa yung mga paring sa ngayon makikita mo yung mga pari nagbibigay sila ng ostya, gano'n. Ayun yung parang example ng religious liturgy. And meron dito tayo isa pang example, which is the sacrament of the Eucharist. And dun naman tayo sa pangatlo, which is the narrative romance. It is a narrative genre in literature that involves a mysterious, adventurous, or spiritualist storyline where the focus is on a quest that involves bravery and strong values, not always a love interest. Dito, ang genre na ito, hindi lang siya puro love interest. Meron siya yung mga about to sa mga parang adventure, yung parang mas excited. At kasi meron, di ba, pag-quest, hinahanap-hanap, parang kailangan mo talaga ng sipag at saka yung bravery na tinatawag. And example ng narrative romance is which is the Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen.
Norman conquest of England. At the Battle of Hastings, Duke William of Normandy defeats Harold Godwinson and establishes his rule over England. The Black Death, one of the largest pandemics in human history. It crossed through Eurasia and killed as many as 200 million people.
First Crusade is launched. At the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II calls upon Christians to undertake a military expedition in support of Byzantine Empire against Seljuk Turks. It would lead to the conquest of Jerusalem 4 years later and the concerted effort by Western Europeans to take control of the Near East. Thomas Aquinas begins his Summa Theologiae. This Dominican friar does not complete this massive work before his death in 1274, but the text has become one of the most important works in theology.
Charlemagne crowned emperor. On Christmas Day, the Carolingian ruler is crowned emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III, the first person in Western Europe to hold that title. Gothic buildings emerge, a new architectural style that would flourish in medieval Europe. It has its beginnings with the work done by French Abbot Suger and his work on the Basilica of Saint Denis in Paris.
First use of gunpowder. The Battle of Langshanjiang was a naval conflict where gunpowder was used as a flamethrower and proved to be very effective. It would mark the beginning of this technology in warfare. Magna Carta. A charter agreed to King John of England and his rebellious barons. The document would come to being seen as the beginning of legal limits on the power of monarch.